We've got this interesting situation here where I was literally here at the church this morning when, I don't know if it was lightning or what happened, but the transformer in the parking lot right over there blew. And I could see the light flash from my office window. And like suddenly my lights went down to like halfway lit. And I was like, what is happening? Didn't have internet, couldn't print anything, couldn't, do any of the things that I came here early to do. And so I go out and Josh was practicing his sermon. He looks at me and he and I are like, well, did you hear that? Yeah, did you hear that? Okay. So we start walking around the building and, lights are like kind of flickering and making you like feel like you're in a zombie apocalypse or something like that. And it's kind of freaky. And then we looked outside and there's smoke coming from the transformer. And we go, oh, that's bad. That's what happened there. So that's why there's the fire department and stuff out in our parking lot, and why our screens were in and out during that first part. But I think we're good now, so hopefully we have screens for the rest of the hour. Fortunately, we have sound the whole time, which is awesome. So you can hear me talking, which is great. So... With all the crazy events that have happened this morning, I'm so glad that you guys are here. I'm excited to kick off the very last week of our Look Out series, where we've been talking about what do you do when you see injustice. We all know what it's like. We all know what it feels like to experience injustice. We know what it feels like when something happens and we know that it's not fair. We know what it feels like when we are dealt an injustice. And this week, we're going to talk about how we deal with that when an injustice happens to us. When I was your guys' age, 5th grade, where are you guys at? 5th grade, new 5th graders. Yeah, we got new 5th graders in the room with us. When I was your age, I got detention in the lunchroom because the lunch lady was on a power trip and wanted to demonstrate her power, and I was one of those random students selected to be an example. So, I know that's hard to believe, he's such a well-behaved kid, but I was sitting in the lunchroom, and I have this vivid memory of her walking around, detention, just literally just like that. And I was in her line of sight. And I remember going, what? Like those high-pitched sounds that people make when it's unfair, the what? And I said that out loud. And she looked at me and was like, double. And everybody else got 5 minutes, I got 10. So I was like, it's one of those situations I was literally just sitting here waiting to leave and, go to recess, because I still had recess at that time. And so it was, one of those situations that you just scream, that's not fair. There's another time, I was a little older than 5th grade. I was probably in 8th or 9th grade. And I was, on my way to first hour. I was late all the time. How many of you guys, you're late to first hour a lot? and it's how many of you, it's because you can't drive and you're waiting on the rest of your family. And that's awesome. Yeah, so you understand me. So I got detention because I was tardy too many times to first hour. And I tried explaining, I'm never late to any of my classes. Look at I have a perfect, non-tardy record, except for first hour. And that's because I got to wait for the rest of my crazy family to get ready in the mornings, right? I've got to wait on my 3 other siblings. I've got to wait on my mom and dad. And then I can't drive. I can't help that I can't drive myself to school, right? I tried reasoning with the principal. And he said, well, life's not fair. And that was the end of it. And I said, what, is there anything I can do to get out of it, right? I've got a life. I can't stay for an hour after school. And he goes, well, if one of your parents want to serve detention for you, since it's their fault, then sure, that can be your way out. And so, thankfully, I have a dad who loves me, and he went and sat in that detention for an hour for me. So that was awesome. I got out of that one. But it's one of those situations, too, that you're I can't control. That's not fair, right? And you guys know what that's like. You know what it's like to be in a situation, and how often do you catch yourself saying that's not fair? Well, if you're like me, sometimes, especially when I was your guys' age, I said a lot more than I do now, because now I'm well, I say what my dad and my principal say is life's not fair, son, right? Because it's just a part of life. You're more used to it when you get older, I guess, but especially at your guys' age, everything seems to be about fairness. And if something's not fair, then it's a huge deal to us, right? The list goes on for things that are unfair. And you and I could go deeper. And sometimes you experience injustices in your life in personal ways. Right? The kinds of injustice that feel a lot heavier for you to overcome than just like a detention at school, right? Maybe you've been mistreated before. And so you've got this name tag that you're kind of carrying around. Life's not fair. And maybe you were mistreated and maybe you were like me and given detention when you didn't deserve it. But something's happened and you were just mistreated. It's not right, it's not fair, but it's life, and that's what happened. Some of you got a different story. Maybe you've been bullied, and you go to school and you try to be nice to everybody, and you can't control certain things about yourself. You can't control how you look. You can't control like a lot of the things about you, but for whatever reason, somebody has exploited what they see as a weakness, and you've been bullied by it. Or maybe you have a certain kind of personality or a certain kind of religious belief, or maybe some kind of thinking that or a way of doing things that other people don't like or don't approve of, and so you feel judged by other people. And you feel like that's not fair. Why am I judged by that? Or I'm just trying to care about people, or I'm just trying to do the best that I can. Why are you judging me? And we feel the unfairness of that. Maybe it's something bigger and deeper, and maybe you've experienced this where you've had to go through the loss of a loved one, and it's just unbearably difficult. And you're sitting there and you're going, but that's not fair. They didn't do anything, and you have to now deal with that. Maybe you've been abused before, and you just feel the weight of that. Maybe you feel some kind of shame because of the abuse. Maybe you feel in some sort of way that you deserved it even though you didn't. And maybe you just feel like you're not good enough. But you feel like life's not fair. Life is always against you. And you feel the weight of life's not fair. And it bothers you. And it hurts. And if we're honest, it's not. None of this is fair. But when we experience these things, they can lead to you to start asking tough questions about God. If we're being completely honest, maybe some of you haven't experienced much of this yet, not enough to shake your faith at all, but some of you, maybe you've had to go through some situations where you face some of these situations, and it causes you to ask tough questions about God. Because if God was truly loving and truly powerful, then how could He allow something so unfair and unjust to happen in my life? And so this is the tension that we manage, especially as Christians. When it comes to dealing with injustice in our lives, there's actually a lot more to it than the simple questions of, does God care? Is He powerful? Is He there? There's actually more to it than those tough questions, which is encouraging. But when we're in the moment, when we're in that circumstance, it's hard to recognize what that is. Good news is no one better understood this feeling of injustice than Jesus Himself. You see, when Jesus was around teaching and being nice to people and healing people and performing miracles and doing all kinds of things, He fed 5,000 people out of just some bread and fish. He did some awesome things, but the religious leaders didn't like that because He was claiming to be something that they saw as blasphemy. He was claiming to be the very Son of God. He's claiming to be someone of divine dissension, which is something that you don't say. You don't say that I'm the Son of God, right? That's to say that you are God, right? Like this is the way I thought about this because this was kind of confusing for me when I was younger. Like if a dog has a kid, then that dog is a dog, right? It's not going to give birth to kittens, right? And likewise, if a cat has a child, then that cat is a cat. If your mom and dad give birth to you, then you are a human. Jesus is saying, I'm the Son of God, which means He is a God. So He's saying, I am God. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And this is what threw the religious leaders over the edge because they're like, hey, you can't say that because you're not God. I know you. You were born in Bethlehem. You're from Nazareth. There's no way that you're God. Your dad's a carpenter. And so Jesus, even though he was nice to people, he gave people second chances, he forgave people of unforgivable things, somehow life still wasn't fair to him. In fact, if you know the story of Jesus' betrayal and his crucifixion, then you know that this is true. In fact, let's look here to Matthew chapter 27. This is where Jesus is brought before the governor, before Pilate, and they had a custom where they would release a Jewish prisoner every year to the crowd. And so Jesus is before Pilate, and here's what happens. The governor asked, he's talking to the crowd here, "Which of these two do you want me to release to you?" Now, what you got to know is when he brings out Barabbas, the person that he's having people choose, he thought it was a no-brainer because he couldn't find any fault in Jesus, even though the religious leaders were ticked at him. He questioned Jesus, and Herod had questioned Jesus, and they're all like, "So what's the big deal? Like, he seems harmless to me, right?" And so, he's like, "I know what I'll do. I'll release a criminal, like a real criminal, someone who's been a murderer and a thief, and I'll put him in front of the people, and then they'll want Jesus to be set free because there's no way they're going to let this criminal go." So he puts Jesus and Barabbas in front of the crowd, and he says, "Which of these do you want me to release to you?" And the crowd shouted back, "Barabbas, Barabbas, Barabbas." And they're cheering for Barabbas. And Pilate responded, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" And they shouted back, "Crucify him. Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared even louder, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And we know today, and Pilate knew then, that this was an unfair thing. This was unfair to release Barabbas, a murderer and a thief, so that Jesus, who's innocent, should be crucified and put to death in the most shameful way, in the most excruciating way at that time. But yet, even though life's not fair, Jesus' faith never faltered. Sometimes injustice can make us question God and ask tough questions about God. But what we need to learn from Jesus is Jesus had a faith that came from knowing God himself. While he was fully God, and this doesn't make sense if you try it mathematically, but while Jesus was fully God, he was still fully human. And he probably experienced doubts just like you and me. And in fact, Scripture says that there's no temptation that has seized us that Jesus hasn't already dealt with. I think that includes, Jesus probably had doubts, but Jesus knew who God was. At the end of the day, even though the situation wasn't fair, he knew who God was. He knew that God was a God who recklessly pursued his people in a way that didn't make sense. He was a God who loved unjustly. In other words, even when we didn't deserve love from God, God was the kind of God who would love us anyway and pursue us anyway. And Jesus knew that God spoke the universe into being, that he was all-powerful, that he was all good. And because Jesus knew that about God, he was able to move past his doubt and to trust God in the midst of that unfair situation. He knew that the forgiveness of our sins and a right relationship with God was the thing that was most important, regardless of what was fair or unfair in his current circumstance. And what I want you guys to know this morning is that while you may have gone through situations that make you feel like life just isn't fair, this is unjust. The thing that you need to know more than any of that is this. Is that even though life is unfair, even though that life is unjust, even though that things happen that don't make sense, things that happen that make us ask the tough questions about God, the thing that we need to remember at the end of the day is this. That despite all the labels that we carry around because of the unfair circumstances that have happened in our lives, the most important thing is that we are loved by God. The most important thing is that nothing can separate us from that love. not unfair circumstances, not anything that's happened to you, not anything that's going to happen to you. There's nothing that can top this. And because of this, we can trust that even though we experience injustice, that God is still in control and God is good. And so that leaves us with something that we have to choose then. When you experience injustice, you can either respond or react. Let me break this down a little bit. When you react to something, that means something else, one of the circumstances in your life has had the control over you to cause a reaction. And so maybe you thought one thing and something happened and now you think another. That's reacting. But if Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, if Jesus promised that life will be unfair, but in the end it will all work out, our goal is to give other people the same hope that you have in God and to remember who He is. When you know that, then you can, rather than reacting to the negative circumstances around you, you can respond because you've planned how you're going to respond and think about God when difficult situations happen. You can either respond to them or you can react to them. And reaction usually happens out of the emotions we're feeling in the moment and not really a true reflection on what's true. So we can respond by doing two things. One is not to react. When you feel the urge, when you stub your finger or your toe or something, you want to respond in like yelling, or you want to react and like when I smashed my thumb with a hammer, I want to yell like ah! And then some words come to my mind and I choose not to say them, right? So like you can react and just say what first comes to your mind, or you can respond and calmly walk outside and take an axe and start beating on some wood so that you feel better, right? No, I'm just kidding. I have done that, but we can choose to respond rather than just react with what comes natural in the moment. When someone calls us a name, the natural reaction is to call another name back. But if we choose to respond, then we can respond in a more wise manner rather than just reacting to what we're feeling in the moment because we're hurt. So instead of reacting, choose to respond. When you respond from a place of knowing who and whose you are, you can be confident in knowing that injustice doesn't define you. It doesn't have power over you. So the next time you feel like life is unfair or something unjust has happened, respond, don't react. Just remember, when you experience injustice, you can either respond or react. We can respond knowing who God is and the love that He has for us, and knowing that He has our best intentions in mind. That He wants what's ultimately best for us and good for us. And while unfair things happen, and while God doesn't cause those unfair things to happen in order to get your attention, He does use those unfair things to speak to us in unique ways if we are willing to respond by listening rather than reacting. So as you guys get ready to go to your small groups, here's the question I want you guys to be thinking about. What's one unfair event or circumstance that I'm dealing with in my life right now? I'm going to pray for you guys and you'll be dismissed to your small groups.